I'm very pleased to shift our gears here and to move on onto, again, media space. I know we've talked in the previous session about journalists and their role in knowledge mobilization and also knowledge disinformation, building capacity. So I'm looking forward to discussing with our colleagues today what can be done in the area of fact-checking when it comes to digital warfare. In fact, this is the title of our session. Fact-checking and digital warfare. I'm pleased to introduce the speakers first. Our first speaker would be Viktoriia Romaniuk, director of the Mohyla School of Journalism at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy, where you also teach, which is great. She chairs the UNESCO Information for All Program Working Group on Information Ethics and is a visiting professor at the Charles III University of Madrid. She's also the deputy chief editor of StopFake, a very famous platform, a fact-checking organization dedicated to combating propaganda and disinformation in the media. As a communications professional and educator with extensive experience in academia, civil society, journalism, Viktoriia has spoken in numerous conferences and has authored and co-authored many publications in journals, academic journals included. Our second speaker is Philip Mai, who is a co-director and a senior researcher in the Social Media Lab at the Toronto Metropolitan University. Philip is also a co-founder of the International Conference on Social Media and Society. At the Social Media Lab, Philip works on technology policy and data-related issues, knowledge mobilization, information diffusion, business and research partnerships, and practical applications of social media analytics. His research interests are digital political transparency, dis- or misinformation campaigns, online toxicity, conspiracy theories, and extremism. Mai's research and commentaries have been featured in various national and international media outlets, including Bloomberg, Business Week, CBC, The National, The Globe and Mail, The Conversation, and elsewhere. I'm extremely pleased to be monitoring and chairing this session. And our first presenter is Dr. Romaniuk, speaking on fact-checking in times of war, how StopFake is redefining the rules of information warfare. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. It's a really great honor to participate in this conference, as well as a great opportunity to talk with you. It is a difficult time now. It's very challenging to prepare some specific and clear messages, since the situation changes very, very quickly every morning, but I'll try. And so my first question is, if a lie is repeated 1,000 times, does it become the truth? This is one of the key questions in the fight against disinformation. Disinformation strategy rely on the long-term systematic effort to distort reality. Unfortunately, under the influence of disinformation, the truth can be manipulated, reshaped, and take multiple shades and interpretation. But countering the disinformation and fact-checking offer a way how to fight back. And today, I'll try to share my experience and experience of my organization that I represented. I mean StopFake, because yes, of course, a lot of different aspects I represented, but today I'll try to talk about fact-checking and verification information. So, first of all, I would like to mention that war in Ukraine began in 2014, when 7% of Ukraine's territory in Donbass and Crimea were occupied by Russia, and we quickly realized and understood the systematic and aggressive lies of Russia propaganda had devastating objective. And for 10 years, we have been preparing for the new stage of this war. Now, it's just a next step of this war. The organization I represented, StopFake, was founded in 2014 by lecturers and students of Mohyla School of Journalism, and it's also a very interesting process because how we can combine different activities, and professional fact-checking organization and academic. The StopFake team has been conducted daily monitoring of Russia and English language media for suspicious content, and we have been developed methodology for analyzing and verifying information while fostering a professional community of fact-checkers in Ukraine. And our team was among the first in Ukraine and also in Central Europe, I absolutely sure, to implement implemented a professional tool for information verification. So it was 10 years ago, 2014. The main objectives of StopFake team has been to demonstrate that Russia disinformation is systematic strategy of Russia government. It's just not misinformation or some mistake or something else. It's systematic approach of Russia government. And StopFake team not only refute fake news, but also creates a propaganda archive and database which we continue to analyze now. In February 2020, StopFake became a member of International Fact-Checking Network, IFCN, joined community of organization commitment transparency and accuracy and ethical fact-checking standards. Just a month later, StopFake became Meta's global third-party fact-checking partners for Ukraine, and now we verify information on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and also verify information for different platforms because we also is a partner of Google company. Over the years, StopFake has debunked more than 10,000 fake stories, exploiting manipulation and misinformation that sought to distort reality. Today, our content is available in 14 languages, ensures that the truth reach audience across the globe. Finally, very important moment that I would like to mention that introduced annual survey of the media consumption habit in Ukraine showed that 18% of Ukrainians regularly use our website to check news, to verify information. It means that StopFake website now like a huge media outlet. Our approach is built on the MAT method, monitoring, archiving, and debunking, a systematic strategy that allows use to expose and counter false narrative effectively. Amongst our activities, regular monitoring, as I mentioned before, user analysis and refutation of fake news and disinformation, analysis of phenomenal Kremlin propaganda in all aspects and forms, training and educational program regarding the verification information, digital tools, and so on, development of media literacy and conducted media research. I think it's really very interesting topic how we can communicate and build our audience, and I think the media literacy, this is a very, very important key how we can be alternative platform for our huge audience, and especially for journalism it's really very interesting topic how to build our audience, how to work with different type of audience and communicate. How we verify information in general, absolutely typical way, searching for confirmation in open source, looking for possible witnesses, requesting clarification from official, and of course researching information about author, some source, analyzing photo and video if available. But what is key to successful work? And this is, for me, it's very, very important point because we have to build a network of partners in advance before crisis or war started. It's really very important because I always receive a question. So tell me how you verify information during the war. Is it difficult or not? And my answer is yes, because we have been prepared and we have community and we have network, journalists, civil society activists, military personnel, educator, and government representatives. And we created that network before the war. And this is very, very important. Yes, of course, we can verify information, we can explain what is true, what is false, but it's very important very quickly receive information and very quickly spread our debunking material. I would like to show you very, very significant example. A Russia First channel reported that Ukrainian citizens massively became refugees in Russia. As a confirmation, the channel showed pictures, a car lining up near the Ukraine-Russia border. But the news showed no real footage of refugees, only old archived video. This was really very suspicious, and we decided to check this information, and we contacted the Russia Federation Migration Service and asked about the actual number Ukrainian refugees. They have received application only 5 Ukrainian citizens. But during our phone conversation, the representative admitted that some times ago they have been instructed to prepare an expected more large wave of refugees. And they had already bought tent, some cooking equipment, and so on and so on. The refugees from Ukraine only started arriving in Russia later, after Russia-backed force launched armed attack in Donetsk and Lugansk, and you might guess that it was one of the first articles on our website in 2014. But what is very, very important here, because yes, of course, yesterday we talked a lot about database, about digital instrument, how to collect some data and verify information, but the very, very important sometimes just talk with ordinary people to understand the context, to understand the cultural, historical, local situation. It's most important than sometimes collecting some data. So the next examples, and here I would like to ask you, please take a close look here. What do you think of these pictures? Microphones, yes, thank you very much. The photo shows Eduard Basurin, one of the commander of the so-called DPR People's Militia. For a long time, he was spokesman for the organization and held daily briefing for journalism in Donetsk. In real, nothing interesting happened in this briefing, and Basurin would read some statistic and some ordinary information about current event, and this daily event attracted little interesting for journalism, and only local Donetsk TV channel come to this briefing. But suddenly, we saw that journalists from many Central Russian media outlets came to this briefing. Why? What is the real? And also, among this journalism, the crew was a crew member that had experience covering the military conflict in different parts of the war. And just few days later, the DPR army launched of offensive against Avdiivka. It's 2017. So, even such minor details provide information about the enemy's intention, and fact-checking and verification information can help us to predict some event. Really, fact-checking is a tool of strategic communication, and I also communicate with my colleague from different State Department and representative from strategic communication services. And I always say that fact-checking, professional fact-checking and verification information, it's really very important tools to predict some event. So, for maximum effectiveness, it is crucial for fact-checker to act promptly, utilize all methods and tools of verifying information, both digital and traditional media, personal communicate with witnesses, and pay attention to the detail and identify pattern and repetition in story, detect a fundamental narrative. And here I would like to talk about the narrative intelligence, because it's also one of the very important part of our work, our activities. And narrative intelligence involves the capacity to recognize pattern and structure in story, to identify the central themes and characters, and to use this information to better decision making. Also, narrative intelligence can help us to understand the future event and can help us to predict something. In 2023, analysts at StopFake conducted a study, anti-European Union narrative through Russia-Ukrainian War, and we analyzed and all debunk claim from StopFake from 2014 to 2023, and selected 6,064 materials related to European country and West. And this claim were categorized by narratives and divided into two categories, before and after Russia's full-scale invasion. And this analysis shows how disinformation narrative changed over the time. Among the narratives before Russia's full-scale invasion on Ukraine, of course, I think it's very, very well-known information. Ukraine is a failed state, decline Western support of Ukraine, fake legalization of annexation of Crimea and the occupation of Donbass, European Union as an aggressor, Ukraine as a fascist state, European Union controls Ukraine, and so on and so on. And since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the map of narratives has been changing somewhat. It was obvious that military and political events have influenced the semantic emphasis of the previous topic and added new meaning to them. Agnieszka yesterday mentioned very, very good phrase that, yeah, we have basic narrative, global narrative, and some messages. It's very, very interesting to analyze and compare these messages with the basic global narratives. And so military aid to Ukraine is the most represented narrative in the information space in the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The topic of Ukrainian refugees in the European Union is most represented in the database. Analysis of database selected debunking claims of which country will involve in disinformation, in what narrative, and how frequently is quite revealed. And here we can see the top country that mentioned in Russia disinformation and in our database. Number 1, Poland, Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy. Many fakes and disinformation stories are linked Canada, of course. Russia propaganda skillfully integrates the messages into current topic and use. The majority of false reports concern Canada's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is frequently discredited due to the Ukrainian heritage. And of course, additionally, a recent report in the information space has been connected to President Trump's statement about the potential takeover of Canada with Ukraine, seems also appearing in the discourse. I would like to show you one example. Pro-Russia sources claim that Ukrainian diaspora in Canada called for a referendum on joining the United States, and they attributed this to Steve Tkachuk, supposedly to head of the Ukrainian association in Toronto. In real, no such person or organization exists, but this fake story is spread by pro-Russia information channel and that regularly push information about Ukraine. So the main characteristic of Russia disinformation now, first of all, from centralized to decentralized propaganda, while RT and Sputnik remain active, Telegram, where 70% of Ukrainians get news, TikTok and fringe media now plays a key role in spreading targeted disinformation. The next rise of AI and deepfake, exploiting Western media and target international audience and attacked fact-checkers and media, and Russia discredit fact-checkers, creates a fake fact-checking organization and benefit from a shift in social media policies, making disinformation hardest to combat. Yesterday, we also talked about the challenges for fact-checkers today. So months ago, what are the main challenges our organization is faced today? A month ago, I would say it was security, as we work on a war zone and male colleague as the fact-checkers at the front line. It's our reality. We work online and my colleagues in the front line. But today, it is a challenging geopolitical process, the discreditation of role of fact-checkers and combated disinformation and global pressure, of course. We are entering an era, a great challenges for journalism and freedom of speech in general, but I hope we will talk about it later, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your fascinating presentation. Lots to discuss. So next speaker is Philip Mai. Presentation titled Digital Battleground, an examination of anti-refugee discourse on Twitter against Ukrainians displaced by Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the organizer for having me. My name is Philip Mai. I'm the co-director of the Social Media Lab in Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm here today to present a case study that we at the lab did last year looking at how, specifically Twitter, how the conversation about Ukrainian refugees are occurring, what people are saying about Ukrainian refugees, and what kind of frames people are using to discuss and to discredit or to support Ukrainian refugees. As part of our lab, what we do is we take empirical data, so it's not just hearsay. We look at the digital exhaust or digital footprint that people leave behind online to see how they say and how they express themselves on these topics. We're new to the Ukrainian studies community, so I want to take this opportunity to also just introduce ourselves to you and also to introduce some of the tools that we've developed at the lab that might be of interest to some of the researchers that are in the room and some of the students in the room who are looking for data to examine things that they are interested in. I hope you will indulge me and let me introduce ourselves a little bit before I get into the case study. So again, our lab started about 15 years ago. We have grown with social media. We started in 2010 at Dalhousie University, and then a few years later, we moved the entire lab to Toronto Metropolitan University. And as you can see, our research interest has basically matched and mirrored many of the things that we are now concerned about and worry about with social media. At the beginning, we were looking at things like, how does academics use social media? But those are the early days when things were a little bit more innocent. By 2013, 2014, we got into things like, misinformation, looking at politics and how people are using social media to get an advantage or an edge on their competition. We kept on adding research areas simply because social media became woven into all aspects of our lives. Anatolia and I, when we first started the lab in 2010, when we were asked to be interviewed for something, the stories that usually appears, that we would appear in, would be in the last 3 to 5 minutes. The fluffy puppy stories at the end of the newscast. Now, when we are being asked to go on and talk about anything related to social media, we're in the first 5 minutes of the show, because it shows how social media at the beginning was considered to be a fad, has now become basically front and center, because that's where the eyeballs are. People go to where the people are, and they're online now. We have made a decision when we first started the lab to never accept money from any of the platform that we study. We work very hard to get fundings from everybody else except, so they come to offer in the past. Anatolia and I always joke that our main job is basically figure out how to keep the light on. That and doing research. And as an academic research lab, we do what you expect of an academic research lab. Conference presentation like this, journal articles, book chapters, posters, and so on. Some of our recent publication in the last few years since the invasion, we've started pivoting and putting our lenses and our data knowledge onto looking and examining the effect of the war, but specifically on Canadians. So we, for example, surveyed 1,500 Canadians and asked them, hey, have you seen any of these common narratives that are being pushed by Russia? Because we're trying to provide our policymakers with information about the kind of lies that have legs in this country. So this way, if they have limited resources, these are the, let's say, top 3 narratives that tend to be believed by Canadians. Then the policymakers can then use that information to decide, how do we counter that? Because they might not have money and resources to counter, let's say, all 10, 15 of the most common, but they will have some resources to counter some of the more pernicious type of information. So that was the idea behind the study on the factors that contribute to pro-Kremlin disinformation. We also started looking in things like, hey, there's things like soft moderation, like blur screens and little footnote. Because for a long time, one of the ways that social media company can go to Parliament and go to Congress and says, hey, look, we're doing something. We're putting little footnotes at the bottom, right? We won't take the post away, but look, we're doing something. We're paying fact checkers to provide the fact check. And look, we're providing the footnotes. And we want to know, does the footnote help? Does it reduce the number of spread or sharing? And yes, it does. So if you're interested in any of those studies, the UR code is there. But if you like the slides, talk to me at Anatolia afterward, and we'll have to provide you with the slides. The other thing that we've been doing is that we realized when we first started out, it takes a year and a half to 2 years for some of our publications to ever see daylight. And by that time, nobody cares. So by 2017, we realized we have to start pushing and publishing public reports, which we can then spend a year or two later doing academic journals articles on them. But in the meantime, at least the content of what we're working on is already out and part of the discussion. So our reports have been showing up in parliamentary meetings, reports of the government, and the only reason we know that is when a reporter calls and says, "Hi, I just did a Freedom of Information request, and your lab name was mentioned in this report. Can you send us a copy?" That's how we know that the stuff that we're doing is having impact, because people are quoting it and citing it. Our research has been featured variously in all over the country because of the types of research that we do. So next, I'm going to do a quick overview of some of the tools that might be of interest to some of the students and researchers that are in the room. Because one of the complaints a lot of people have is, I have interesting questions I want to ask, but I don't know how to get that data, and I don't have the time to get another PhD in computer science, or I don't have the resources to have a full-time IT person on staff who helped me develop a script and capture that data and give me a CSV. And when we decided a few years ago, probably if anybody's going to provide that service in Canada, it's probably going to be us. So that's why we started developing software to make it available to the academic community. If you know how to use a search bar, you know how to use our tools. Some of the tools that we developed, one of which is called Communalytic, which I'm going to go into a bit details in a second. That allows you to capture all kind of data from social media to use for your study. And then we develop a lot of dashboards to track things like deepfakes. So every time an incident that involves deepfakes that appears in the world, it will show up in our dashboard. So if you are an analyst working for the government, if you're an analyst or a researcher working in academia, the latest example of, let's say, deepfakes appearing somewhere in the world, you can just go and see, hey, today, did anybody fact check anything involving deepfakes? It'll be there because we basically done that job for you. Same thing with the conflict misinfo dashboard, which I'm going to go into detail in a little bit. And the Poly Dashboard. Poly Dashboard is an app that tracks every single political advertisement in Canada, in the US, and 30 other countries. So for example, if you want to know what the Liberal Party did this week, this month, this year on Facebook, you can go to our app and you can see it, say, hey, show me who they are targeting this week. Which province are they spending all of their money? Are they going after eyeballs that belongs to 18 to 24-year-olds in Quebec? Are they going after women 65 plus in Nova Scotia? You will know that by looking at our dashboard. So getting to a little bit about Communalytic, let you get all kind of data from social media, Blue Sky, Mastodon, Reddit, Telegram. So there was a lot of talk and discussion about Telegram yesterday, simply because that's a place where a lot of Ukrainians get their news. So we've been also doing a lot of work looking at Telegram and how that is being used by the people on that platform, and also who actually have a voice on that platform and who has influence, and who are the main characters on that. So we've been tracking all of that, and we're going to be putting out more reports on that so that others can figure out, okay, these are the accounts we need to pay attention to, because these are the one that has outside influence in the conversation and the narrative about Ukraine. Along with being able to collect data, once you have the data, we can then help you to analyze it. So you can do, there's 4 different modules in there. There's a civility module that basically, hi, here's a data set of 1 million Telegram posts. Show me only posts that contains toxic messages. I don't want to see anything else. Out of the 1 million, show me, let's say, the 10,000 or whatever that might contain toxic messages. And recently, we gave you the ability to also find pro-social messages. So for example, only show me messages that include pro-social behavior. You can also do sentiment analysis. There's a topic analyzer in there and a network analyzer. So getting to the conflict misinfo, which I think will be interesting to a lot of the people here, which speaks to a lot of the work that the International Fact Checker Group does. Right now, if you want to know if there's a recent fact check that involves the Russo-Ukrainian War, you'll have to go to, let's say, AFP or any of the other groups, StopFake, right? What we did was we built a dashboard, so every morning you can just load up this dashboard, bookmark it, and you can get the latest fact check that involves this. Because many fact-checking groups, they do fact-checking on a wide variety of topics in their country and in their region. But we're not interested in everything that they do. We only want to bring in anything and everything that involves the Russian-Ukraine war. Why? The reason, because we believe that a lot of these narratives are being shopped around, meaning they will try something in Africa 3 months earlier, and they will see if it works. If it works there, they will try to do a version of it. We saw that evidence when we were doing research on COVID misinformation during 2020. We noticed that bad actors were literally using Latin America and Africa as testing grounds. So many of the things that we would say, like, wait, we saw that 3 months ago. And then now somebody in the US have taken a version of that lie, but they put a spin on it to make it feel more local 3 months later. So we use this as an early detection tool where we say, okay, let's see what's floating around. And then we keep an eye on to see which of those narratives pops up again in a different part of the world. Because these bad actors, they might not meet in a room, but they're watching each other. They're learning from each other. We need to learn from each other also. Because they see what's working in the US, and then it shows up in Brazil. We saw a lot of that pattern. The pattern was very interesting. A lot of stuff that's happening in the US end up in Brazil. And one of the reasons why is in Brazil, there is a huge network of churches that were started in the 80s by American churches. So they have a connection there. So as a result, there's a constant communication between religious groups in the US that are more right-leaning to the group in Brazil. So as a result, they share notes. So we saw that pattern there. So one of the things on the conflict research portal is the dashboard that I mentioned earlier. You can literally go there and just see fact checks from over 200 plus fact checkers. And then if you see anything that is interesting to you, you click it. We take you directly to the fact checkers so that you can get more detail about that. For example, recently when the US shut down USAID, there was a lie going around that says that USAID was using their money to pay for, stars to go to Ukraine, and so on, and it was wasting taxpayer dollars. But that was quickly fact-checked right away. But again, if you are looking for examples for your next presentation, this is a good place to start because it's one of the few places where you can get basically a bird's-eye view of the entire landscape of lies against Ukraine in one place. So this way you can be up to date and help to refute them as they come up. Now we'll finally get to the part that we promised, which is the study that we did last year. The paper is called Digital Battleground, Examination of Anti-Refugee Discourse on Twitter Against Ukrainians and Display by Russian Invasion of Ukraine. I don't have to tell the people in this room about what happened after the war started. A lot of people left simply because there was a lot of fear. I have family in Ukraine, and they were on the borders going to Poland in the days right after. We had to quickly set up, change our homes and get ready to receive them. So I know the experience well. And as a former refugee myself, I came from Vietnam originally. My family came to the US 40 plus years ago as of refugees. So many of the experience that my relatives in Ukraine experience today is reminiscent of my own 40 years ago, which is one of the reasons why I want to do this study in particular. One of the reasons is there's a lot of polarization against refugees right now around the world. You can see that in the politics in the US with the border walls. You can see that changing here in Canada. We used to be a very pro-immigration country, but you can also see the narrative being changed here in Canada already in the last few years. But that didn't happen by accident. There's a lot of reason behind it. But one of the reasons is that state actors have realized that this is a powerful tool and a weapon that they can use. State actors like Russia have used immigration as a weapon against the West, against Europe in the past, and they know that it's very effective. It gives ammunition to right-wing groups in their country because every time they send more people over, for example, through a particular crossing in Finland, it's going to create problems for the Finnish government. We saw that here in Canada a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we have a lot of Haitian refugees coming to Quebec. So the research question that we want to ask is, what are some of the most prevalent types of anti-refugee discourse on X? We were able to get data from X before Elon came along and shut everything down. So most of this data came from that period right before Elon came on because we knew he was going to shut it down. So Anatoly and I started capturing tons and tons of data on this topic so that we could do this study. So what we did is we captured over 800,000 tweets between February 24th and March 31st. We basically searched for any tweet that contained the word Ukraine in various languages. So this way, because we want to be as comprehensive as possible. So once we have that data set, what we did was we then used machine learning to quickly look through the 800,000. Hey, because we have a hunch that most of the anti-Ukrainian stuff is going to be toxic. So we didn't want to look and spend time reading all of the other 800-something thousand tweets. We just wanted to find out the ones that are toxic, because we strongly believe that that's probably one of the vectors which is going to be, or a signifier that's used to pass on some Russian narratives and Russian propaganda. And then once we did that, we then developed a coding schema to basically label the toxic tweets to find out, like, what are they saying? How are they framing? How are they talking about Ukrainian refugees? How are they undermining them? To get a little bit into how we did that. So the machine learning system that we use is something developed by Google called Perspective. We incorporate it into the tool that we develop at the lab called Communalytic. As I mentioned earlier, it can detect pro-social interactions, or it can detect toxic interaction. For this research report, we only use the toxic measures. We look for things like toxicity, severe toxicity, insult, identity attack, profanity, threats. As you can see from the definition, toxicity is stuff that are rude and disrespectful. Severe toxicity is stuff that's very hateful, aggressive, disrespectful. And like I said, in the old days, when we first started doing this kind of research over a decade ago, we would literally give some of our student lab members 10,000 tweets as a sample and says, hi, on a scale of 1 to 10, how toxic is this? 10 years later, we're able to do this now using machine learning. So this way, we can use our research assistant for more valuable things instead of having to read 10,000 tweets and code them. But what does the score mean? If a post have a score of, let's say, 0.7, it means that if you were to show that same post to 10 people, 7 out of 10 will probably say, yeah, that's toxic. Okay, so this has been tested many times, and we validated Google's work. Before we try to use this tool as a part of our study, we do internal study to validate that it's accurate. Otherwise, we wouldn't put our name behind the tool. Now you know a little bit about how we detected the toxic messages among all the posts that we captured. So here's some examples, some of the claims. Things like they're dangerous, they're criminal. So there's one that says Ukrainian refugees kill sleeping man with axe and rapes women. The claims about refugees abusing the system. Hey, look, they're in Germany, but every month she goes home to visit her family. So is she really a refugee? So they want to plant the seed of doubt. So this way, the local population will not support helping Ukrainian. This is what I call very insidious little comments that when you have enough of them and you do it repeatedly, it becomes part of people's belief system, right? So, like I said, with this project, we want to document, like, what are those things that they are saying? We used 3 different human coders to code those tweets after we identified them. But before we did that, what we did was we went through the literature and we identified all of the frames that have been used to discuss and talk about refugees, right? And then we use those frames to map them to the narratives that were in our data. Because regular people, when they speak about refugees, they're not going to say things like administrative costs, right? They're not going to say things like security. Well, they might, but not in that way. So we want to map some of those things that are in the literature to our first set of codes, right? And then we gave the initial code to the 3 coders, and then independently they had to go through and look at all of the tweets and then put them into these buckets. And then over time, we realized that some of the initial buckets that we developed earlier, the 5, some of the tweets didn't fit into some of those buckets. So we had to get more buckets. So as you can see, the list became longer. Right? Because some of the tweets were like more politically, most of the tweets we found were politically motivated partisan content. There was a lot of expression of countering. That's very critical to point out. Countering is when other people come on and say, well, that's not true, what you're saying. It's a lesson not to ignore things when you see them online. It's important to counter them because it helps to lessen the impact of that narrative. It's basically taking a bucket of cold water and putting on the fire that they're trying to start. But we saw a lot of that. That was the second most frequent thing that we saw in the data when we started the coding. So here's the result. What we found is that among the toxic posts, 53 of them were basically expressing very pro-Kremlin narratives. That 53% is made up of, 33% are politically motivated partisan content aligning with pro-Kremlin narratives, discrediting Western institutions like NATO. 2% were attempt at discrediting, Western media in general. 12% was narratives characterizing Ukrainian refugees as parasitic to the host country because they wanted to dehumanize Ukrainians as not deserving of help. So this way, it's easier for the member of parliament to say, my people don't want this, right? And look, there's evidence of it. The other one was 6% was undermining the Ukrainian government. They were discrediting, the government institutions and the government itself as being illegitimate, or they were pushing the pro-Nazi narrative and Ukrainian being racist a lot in the early days, we noticed, because they want to push the idea that Ukraine do not help because they are Nazi. So as a result, they should be your enemy, which is a lie. But that was something they were pushing in the early days. You don't hear that as much anymore. They move on to other things. But in the early days, that was one of the things they were pushing on. So in conclusion, our study was trying to contribute to the growing body of literature documenting the trends in politicization of refugees and partisan state actors. And it highlights the need for a more nuanced approach to reviewing toxic posts and targeting refugees, because as you can see, 20%, if you only rely on computational methods, you might miss the fact that, hey, sometimes people use bad words to defend people. By having both computational and a manual approach, you were able to tease out the actual conversation. Where are people just being nasty, and where are people countering that? For future research, we want to look at the visual content. As you know, TikTok is very popular. Lots of things are in videos. There's no little notes at the bottom. You have to see the video to understand the context or what the message is trying to say. In the future, we're going to look into how people are using visual content to push these kind of narratives. For some closing thoughts, the West immigration policy is going to be exploited. There's no question there. Countries like Russia, China, and Iran will exploit that. And probably the next time I present this, sadly, I'll probably have to add the US flag to that. We have an election coming up here in Canada. One of the concerns that we have at the lab is whether the US will activate and change their refugee laws in the US that will cause a panic and cause a lot of people who are currently in the US to come up here during our election. We have an election coming up. So that's a way to interfere in our election without directly interfering in our election. They simply change their policy, and people being people that will make a decision about their lives, their family, the likely place they're gonna run to is here. That will create a problem for us right in the middle of an election. So that's one of the things that at the lab we've been keeping an eye on, just to see whether there's sign of that happening and whether our government is ready to respond to that, because that is a lever that a foreign government can use to put the thumb on the scale to help the population vote in a way that's more preferable to them. So anyway, in closing, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Philip, thank you very much. Viktoriia, thank you very much. I am sure there would be very many questions and opportunities for you to expand on what you had to say before.
You were talking about the anti-refugee narrative. Do you think that narrative is actually effective? So does it affect the Western governments, or is it just talks for talks?
It's definitely effective, because you can see the rise of right-wing political parties, let's say in Europe, in Germany, in Slovakia, in Hungary. It is part of their platform. A few years ago, people worried about things like the price of eggs, jobs, right? Now, front and center in most Western countries, one of the main topic of discussion is something about immigration. In the US, it's about the wall. In Europe, it's about migrant. So you can see that popping up all over Europe. So it is changing the discussion. It is changing the way the population see this topic, and it's going to change the country.
I would like to add that in real, for Ukrainian domestic audience, we have a little enough pictures. I absolutely agree with you. For international audience, it's absolutely right, and we have the same data. But for Ukrainian domestic audience, we have another narratives. For example, the refugees in Europe or United States, prostitute or slaves and so on and so on. And it's very interesting because the Russia disinformation and propaganda very effectively targeted different messages for different audiences. That's why it's really effective.
I have the same question actually to both of you. You talked, Viktoriia, about how StopFake could predict things. So my question would be, did you see anything before the invasion that made you wary, that could make you predict the scale of the invasion? I think we all knew that something was going to happen, but perhaps not as massive as it was. I have a feeling we're always the curve behind Russia. We're mapping something when they've already done the harm. So do you have any research projects in how to predict what Russia's going to do when the next grave problem might come?
We don't have any specific project looking up, because prediction is a very difficult thing to do because you need a lot of data to make those kind of prediction. But we know from looking at past data, you can use it to map out what their thinking is, what their strategy are, and then it's difficult to reinvent the wheel. So it's the same group of people that are working. For them, it's a 9-to-5 job. They show up in the office and they have to come up and see what's happening in Western countries where they can insert themselves. Basically, they look for the wound that are in our society and they stick their finger in and wiggle around to see if that hurts. Oh, wait, that really hurts? Let's see how much more we can make that hurt. And that's what they do. So for us, our project is basically trying to map out what they've done in the past. And that gives us a preview of what they're likely to do in the future.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult question because we can analyze some local event, some piece of content, messages, and analyze and debunk these messages. But globally now, I think it's really very difficult to predict situation. Before the full-scale invasion started, we definitely understood that this stage of this war will be. But nobody even can't imagine that it will be such a brutal war. And now I feel the similar feeling, with the new Trump administration and so on.
Perfect. Online audience question, please.
Of course. So the question is coming from Marusia Batyurkiv. It's for both panelists. So my current research concerns the ways in which left so-called intellects, like Jeffrey Sachs and Tariq Ali, are repurposing Russian propaganda as left ideology. Do you have any thoughts as to why this is happening and where they are obtaining their fake news from?
People like Jeffrey Sachs, they've been in this conversation for a long time. So they're just taking their old talking points and applying to this new situation. As somebody who lives in a democratic society, unfortunately, we will have to figure out how to live next to and counter some of their narratives, but we can't silence them simply because if we do, then we become the things that we're fighting against. So the only thing that really works is organize, find people who share your views, and make them known. That's the one thing that I've seen that works.
Yeah, the fighting against disinformation is very comprehensive process, and it's not just fact-checking and even journalism. It's a complex of measures. Of course, fact-checking and verification information, the strategic communications, the professional media, and media literacy and educational systems, complex such events can help us to create a society that is strong against some information threats. Only this way.
Sorry, I want to quickly address a point earlier. In the earlier panel, there was some discussion as to how do we counter some of the experts that are coming out of journalism and international relations. One thing that have worked for us at the lab is that we establish relationship with media long before a story that we might be relevant in comes along, so that we become a trusted source, and that when they call, we're prepared to speak because they're on a tight deadline. So one of the recommendations I have is start compiling a list of experts, what they are able to speak and willing to speak about, do some vetting of who they are and their expertise, and then look for reporters who are writing stories that involve Ukraine, and then contact them and says, hi, I'd like to introduce you to this list of experts we have. Next time you have a story, please bookmark this. And you will find that you will have a bigger share of the voice in the conversation. But without organizing that in that particular way and actively reaching out to reporters to introduce yourself again and again and again, they won't know to call you, because it's easy for them to call up the department at Ottawa. Why? Because the university is there, right? So that's one way to counter that, is compile your own list and then call up reporters and says, hi, next time, call us.
Yeah, and also build a network with different stakeholders, as I mentioned. It's really very important. So to have friends, to have partners who will help spread information, necessary information, true information. It's very important in order to very quickly react and very quickly spread some necessary messages. It's really very important, and don't be afraid to provide some protective action. I absolutely sure that imposing sanction and block propaganda sites and so on, it's necessary when we're talking about national security, not about freedom of speech. When we talk about the national security threats, and when we talk about our global security.
I will follow up yesterday's discussion and today questions were already raised about predictions, because I would encourage you to, based on your debunking processes and fact-checking, which are numerous, valuable thing, but thinking about pre-bunking messages and putting, because our minds and the audience are, when we look at the fact-checking, it's already past. And they don't feel that it's important, because we know that Russia is repeating the same stories all over. So very short-term predictions, like pre-bunking predictions, even to journalists, influencers, your page as a source of giving what will happen, then this message will go first before Russia will spread. Especially when we are, for example, waiting for elections or some moments that can raise some issues. Because in general, if we blame everything, what is going on to Putin, the audience likes saying, yeah, you always say like this. But when you concrete examples and give some instruments to give the immunity for the audiences.
Yeah, thank you very much for the brilliant question, because I'm currently working on an article. My research, pre-bunking campaign, Ukrainian fact-checkers and pre-bunking campaign. I provided a deep interview with a fact-checking organization, a representative fact-checking organization in Ukraine. All my colleagues from different organizations provided a lot of different events. And yes, of course, on one side, we published our articles, debunking materials, but also we have a lot of activities. For example, on our website, StopFake, we have a great section, tools, where we explain how disinformation works, where we publish a review on different digital tools, how to verify information. We publish an interview with expert, and also we publish analytics about some event, and we have multimedia department on my organization, and we create some video and some visual materials to attract attention for some events, some problem with infographics and explanation, and all my colleagues from different organizations do the same. And pre-bunking campaign, it's really very important part, and sometimes we doesn't understand that it's pre-bunking, but we do it.
We've been trying many of these things, whether it's debunking, pre-bunking, accuracy prompts, for a number of years now. And where we are right now is not really a great spot. Facebook, Twitter are dismantling their fact-checking programs. Even yesterday, Elon Musk was talking about fixing community notes because it got too pro-Ukrainian. I'm wondering, is it time for some kind of strategic shift, right? We're talking about a US president who is not just a victim of this disinformation, but now a propagator of it. The richest man in the world, one of the biggest platforms in the world, is spreading this like wildfire. Are these tools still enough to deal with the current problem we're facing? And do we have to start talking about a new strategy to fight the level of information warfare we're currently seeing?
It's really challenging, but we try to communicate also with our partner from Meta, with our partner from IFCN, because it's really a global problem for all of us, fact-checking organization, but I don't have answer now.
As you can remember from my presentation, the number one narrative involving Ukrainian refugees were politics. At the end of the day, I'm sorry to say, a lot of this problem is political in nature. Living in a democratic society, we have, unfortunately, a limited set of options as to how to deal with that. And especially if people who believe and see the world in this way is holding the lever of power, it becomes even more difficult. So I don't know if there is a solution other than the ballot box. If we go and talk about things beyond the ballot box, we're now in a very dangerous and different territory. If you told me a year ago that we're going to have a discussion in Canada about whether we will be the 51st state, I would look at you and it's like, what are you talking about? But yet now the CBC, for example, this weekend is running a call-in radio talk show to discuss what would happen if we were the 51st state. I'm like, what? How is that a conversation topic here? But it is. So I'm sorry, Justin, there's no answer.
Even 2 months ago, not...
I take your point, but I have to disagree. This is not the time to say, oh, well, what can we do? And let's just follow the narrative. Here's where we take an example from Ukraine. What do people in Ukraine do when they don't like what's happening? They stand up and they protest. And that's part of the democratic process. Yeah. And I think your question is spot on. It's a time to shift and say, take the initiative and not just follow what somebody else is creating a narrative. Create your own narrative, create our narrative, and do something about it. And if CBC is saying, why are we having this discussion? Why shouldn't we shift the discussion to, here's what we're doing. This might be a little bit off base because we're having a leadership race right now, but there's a candidate who's taking this discussion and she's running with it. And she's saying, no, this is what we do. And I don't know if in an academic forum I'm allowed to name her, but I think we all know it's Christia Freeland. She's not following a narrative, she's leading the narrative, right? And that's what I think our politicians and our journalists and we as scholars and students, that's what I think we should be doing.
Sorry, that was not the point I was trying to make. It's that we're suffering through what I'm calling basically a normalcy bias. We think that tomorrow will look like what happened yesterday. So it takes a lot for people to get out of that normalcy bias. And right now, that's what we're seeing here in Canada, but especially in the US, where Americans are now starting to wake up to the fact that, wait, things are not going to go back to the way they are. So you're seeing people starting to wake up, but that takes time and a process for that to happen. But normalcy bias is something that's very difficult to overcome. But like you said, eventually it will come simply because the things that are happening will accumulate where people get to the point where they're like, wait, we didn't vote for this. We didn't sign up for this. So yeah, so I'm not saying we should not reframe and change things. I'm just saying that it's going to take a little bit of time for enough people to tip the scale in a different direction. The fact that the CBC is framing the talk show as if this is an inevitability is what I'm questioning.
I'm wondering, aside from increasing funding, what concrete things can the Canadian government do to empower your work? So one thing that stood out during your presentation was how X removed access to certain data. Is that something where a national government can come in and force the disclosure of that data? And then in a related question, what are the limits of national authority when dealing with international social media companies in this context?
So that's something that we've been looking at a lot here. So we've been looking at what the Europeans are doing. They have something called the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act that basically, in different ways, require social media company of a certain size, like size of Meta and X and so on, that have to give access to qualified researchers from academia, for example, so that they can monitor the algorithms and what is being shown to different people online. The problem is, Elon Musk now have the ear of the president. He has the speed dial to the US Trade Representative. And as a result, they are now currently challenging the EU on enforcing that law. So there's a group in Germany that have requested or demanded Twitter data so that they can use it to monitor and watch what's going on during the upcoming German election. And Twitter just simply ignored them and said, nope, we're not giving them. What are you going to do about it? So right now, that's where things are at. So there are things that the government can do. They can pass legislation that says, hi, if you want to be in our country and offer your services to our people, you will have to make your data available to qualified researchers who can basically be on your shoulder watching what you're doing to make sure that everything you're doing is up in the up and up. But the concern right now is that without the US backing such legislation and helping to enforce it, these companies have come to the realization that, what are you going to do to me? The only thing we can do is, hi, get out of our country. But that will create another type of problem in our country, because then you will hear people saying, oh, that's censorship, right? So a lot of government in the West are leery and don't want to do that. That's why you don't hear a lot of it.
Victoria, if you're talking about denazification only in terms of Russia, but declassification, when Ukrainian intelligence declassified information that there are going to be informational operation after Zelensky term was over, and we need to expect that was sort of like pre-banking measure. Was that helpful or not? And do Canadian government need to do that, like strategically open information that is not publicly available to let people know that they need to get ready to something super big and bad?
Yeah, this is a very big problem now. We don't understand the official messages. It's really a very big problem because there are absolutely different points of view and perspective, and now we lack of real information that we can verify, and now it's a big problem. But I hope together with Center of Strategic Communication and our other partners, we can create something. Yeah, it's very important.
Was it helpful when there was information about Zelensky informational campaign declassified?
It depends on the target audience. For domestic, maybe yes, but it's very important how I will communicate in the United States, and now I can't see the strategy, the global strategy of Ukraine in this context.
I wanted to build on the earlier question regarding Meta and the announcement it made to no longer rely on third-party fact-checkers. If you could perhaps expand a little bit more on what it means for your...
For us, we continue to cooperate with Meta until the end of this year. This program cancelled for fact-checkers organization in United States. Now we continue to cooperate and verify information in this program.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add. So the plan for Meta from people that we talked to inside the company is that they're going to test out their own version of community notes this year. They're going to use basically Americans as guinea pig for their new community notes program. They will learn what they can from that and improve it, and that by the end of this year, around this time next year, they'll roll that out to the rest of the world. Whether they will cancel fact-checking programs that they're currently funding in other countries after that is a big open question. But more than likely, if what they've done in the past is any indication, more than likely they're going to say, yes, since we now have this new community note program and we're crowdsourcing and sourcing the fact checks, we don't need to pay for professional fact checkers anymore. I think that's the direction things are going.
I have a very quick question to the second speaker as well, and it might be outside of the scope of your research. You mentioned that your analysis focused on the anti-refugee messaging from 2022 to 2023. I'm wondering if you have a sense of how that messaging has shifted. What are the current messages? We know that a lot of this messaging is time sensitive as well. You mentioned that the message about Ukrainians being neo-Nazis no longer has traction. So what are the new messages that you see appearing on social media? Thank you.
It's something we don't have data for simply because, again, once Elon Musk took over, he basically made the platform dark to us, invisible to us, because we don't have the ability to collect the data in bulk anymore. You randomly just go and search for things, then you'll be studying Swiss cheese, basically, because the data is not a solid block of data. So as a result, we really don't have a sense. We can go and collect data from other platforms like Reddit and so on, but we know from other projects we're doing, not specifically related to Russia-Ukraine, is that the immigration narrative and situation has become front and center for a lot of political parties in Western countries, from France to Germany to Norway to Finland, where there is a party in each of those countries where immigration is their one of their top 3 topics. Here in Canada, that is rising to be the number 4 or 5 now. Maybe it's not the top 3, but it's probably number 4 here in Canada for a particular party, right? And depending on how things play out in the US, it could easily move from number 4, from my assessment, all the way up to number 2 or 1. We'll have to watch that space because we will be affected by how the US, for example, chooses to use, or whether they choose to use immigration as a weapon to tip the scale.
Originally, I wanted to ask you both those questions individually, but they are relevant, so I would appreciate input from you both. So the first question is primarily for Viktoriia. I have heard of StopFake, but have not personally used it, and it sounds like a great tool to navigate the constant news cycle by seeing what are the main narratives that are countered and learning about the events that are happening. So the question is more of a self-help to us based on yesterday's discussion, because we are overflooded with news and news cycles. As a journalist, you have to navigate massive amounts of information daily, filtering it. And how do we grasp those things when it comes to learning about the global context, learning about the war strategy, learning about the daily things that are happening and what's going on in civil proceedings? And it relates to Philippe because you brought up the elections. As citizens in a democratic country, whether here or later in Ukraine after the victory, we will have to engage in the democratic processes, so we have to stay informed of the candidates and all of their policies as well. So my question is more aspect of navigating news cycles, navigating those massive amounts of information and learning about specific personalities and the narratives that are dominant. And the second question is, I'm really glad that Justin, one of the journalist colleagues, asked, how do we tailor our strategies? Because sounds like we have a great number of tools to fact check, to debunk misinformation narratives, to see how those themes persist. But unfortunately, a big amount of people are not using them. So how do we encourage and push for those media literacy programs? How do we encourage people to use those tools? How are those tools used? And in terms of media literacy aspect, back to you, Viktoriia, is do you know about any other efforts that are in Ukraine to increase awareness? So 2 loaded questions, but would really appreciate your input. Thank you.
So regarding media literacy, now in Ukraine, there are a lot of media literacy projects as well as fact-checking organization and fact-checking editorial. It's really relevant and very popular today. We have Project Filter, maybe you know, it's project, media literacy project, conducted Minister of, I don't know how to say now, Minister Culture and Information Security. Also we have a lot of NGO that provided media literacy organization, and one of the important projects in Ukraine was media literacy in secondary schools that provided IREX organization in Ukraine. Of course, StopFake website, because as I mentioned before, we have a special pages and section, media literacy information, how to verify, how to check information for different target audiences. And first question, how we verify information. So once again, we have a great experience, 10 years. So we have our database, we understand the main actors that spread disinformation, we understand the main platforms, the specific, and of course now for us this is not a problem. Yeah, and of course we have very, very professional staff.
So to address your first question, media literacy is something that's been discussed in Canada and the US for decades now. The problem with media literacy is that it's not being incorporated into the school. It's being voluntarily, different teachers, different professors might pick up a module here and there that they incorporate into their curriculum, but it's not part of the mandated curriculum. And there's a lot of history as to why that isn't happening. In the past, countries that have implemented media literacy, like in the Soviet Union, it gets subverted and becomes a nationalist project where under the guise of media literacy, they use it to basically indoctrinate people. So the concern is that if we were to mandate that here in Canada, a future government can use those same vehicle, that same program, to simply change the curriculum, but still use that same umbrella term of media literacy. So one of the ways that some of the folks in media literacy have discussed getting around that concern is teaching students how to detect things like scams online, because the skill set that you can use to detect online scams are the same skill set that you could use to decipher and figure out whether something in the political sphere is, not correct. So that's one way to introduce it, so that to remove the politics from media literacy. So the way here we dealt in Canada is the government of Canada once in a while, every year, gives a grant to a couple of different media literacy groups who then put out lesson plans that could be picked up by teachers randomly, but it's not mandated. And the reason for that is because, again, we're concerned that once it becomes part of the curriculum, it could be subverted. And your second question as to how to stay abreast with so many things happening. At our lab, we use something called social network analysis to map out the world. We strongly believe that things just don't happen. The fact that you hear about it means that somebody else made a decision somewhere else already. You just weren't part of the conversation. So whenever we see something in the news, we always ask, why is that being shown to me right now? Who are the people involved that made the decision? Who's benefiting? Who's losing with this new change? By asking some basic questions like that, it helps you to answer questions like, should I be supporting this? Why is it being told to me right now? Everything's connected, everything's a network, and you are part of that network. Just open your eyes, connect things.
This question is coming from Jeffrey Stepniski. He's asked, increasingly, my undergraduate students rely on or are tempted to rely on generative AI tools like ChatGPT to write essays and develop ideas. I am concerned that the knowledge these tools generate is influenced by disinformation and propaganda. Any thoughts on if this is the case or how we might counter these issues?
During the war, Russia really applied all type of new technology and deepfake and voice modification and so on, so on. And for us, it was challenging. We had to learn new instrument, how to verify information, and we had to learn how to explain and how to educate our audience. Once again, we have to try move on in this reality. Yeah.
I remember when programmable calculators first became available in the late 1980s, early 90s. My math teacher would have a box at the door for the math class, and he has to check the model of your calculator, because some calculator allows you to put in formula that you're supposed to remember. And he wants us to remember it. He didn't want us to cheat by putting it into the calculator and using it during class. Well, guess what? those calculators are everywhere. When the internet came along, librarians have to develop lesson plans as to how to use the internet, how to use Wikipedia. I remember when I was in university, we were told not to trust Wikipedia. Okay, so long story short, these tools are there. They do have problems, but they do have uses. Like we use some of those large language models in our work at the lab to help analyze some of those tweets. Okay, but we know their limitations. So when we use them for things that they're designed for. It's just that the problem is that the marketers have gotten involved and they are over-promising what AI can do. And as a result, you're seeing some of the problems. But I think that in the future, as we know of these limitations, we will work it into our lives and we will know that, yeah, we can't really use it for that. It's not really meant to provide a particular type of help, but it can help you in other areas. But right now, we're still trying to figure that out. But unfortunately, they're here.
This is perfect timing. It is time for us to thank our presenters for their insightful comments.